Buried with thousands. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, died in the summer of 210 BCE, on the road, far from his capital, surrounded by men who immediately began lying about it. He had ruled for 37 years. Before he was an emperor, he was the king of Qin, a western state that his predecessors had spent generations fortifying, expanding, and militarizing. By the time he took personal control of the Qin court, the other warring states of China had been fighting each other for centuries. He ended that. Between 230 BCE and 221 BCE, the Qin armies absorbed or destroyed every rival kingdom on the Chinese landmass. He did not call himself a king after that. He invented a new title, Huangdi, Emperor. What followed unification was not peace in the conventional sense. It was standardization enforced at sword point. Weights and measures were unified. Axle widths were standardized so that carts could travel the new road network. Writing was regularized across regions that had used different scripts for generations. These were administrative achievements, and historians have noted them as such. They were also imposed by a government that treated non-compliance as a capital offense. The emperor dealt with intellectual dissent in documented fashion. Court scholars who invoked the old ways of governance, who cited precedent from the Zhou dynasty, who suggested that the legalist model of total centralized control had limits, were not debated. In 213 and 212 BCE, the emperor ordered books burned across the empire, targeting works of history, philosophy, and poetry that did not serve the state. The following year, according to Sima Qian's Shiji, written approximately 100 years after these events, hundreds of scholars were buried alive for continuing to circulate prohibited texts and for spreading what the court deemed dangerous ideas. The exact number given in the Shiji is 460. That figure has been debated by historians, but the event itself is referenced in multiple early sources. He conscripted labor on a scale that had no precedent. The Great Wall, in its Qin-era form, was not the structure tourists visit today. That version came later under the Han and Ming dynasties, but its foundations were laid under his orders, and the human cost of that construction was severe. Hundreds of thousands of workers, many conscripted, many prisoners of war, labored in conditions that killed a significant portion of them. The same was true of his mausoleum complex, a project that began almost as soon as he took the throne and employed, according to later historical estimates, as many as 700,000 workers over the course of its construction. He was afraid of death. That fear became the defining obsession of his later years. He sent expeditions by sea, one led by a man named Xu Fu, to find the Islands of Immortality described in Taoist legend. Xu Fu left with thousands of people and did not return. The emperor reportedly received word that a sea creature blocked the path and sent archers to kill it. He consulted alchemists. He consumed preparations that his court doctors and Taoist practitioners assured him would extend his life. These preparations were consistent with Taoist longevity compounds of the period, substances that frequently contained cinnabar and mercury. Modern geological surveys conducted around his mausoleum complex have confirmed abnormally high mercury levels in the soil, consistent with large quantities of the substance being used both in the burial complex itself and, by historical inference, in the compounds he ingested. By 210 BCE, he was 50 years old, which was not young for a man of his era and his documented habits. He set out on his fifth imperial tour of the empire, a procession that served both administrative and ceremonial purposes. These tours were substantial undertakings. The imperial train included carriages, officials, guards, and the full apparatus of court. The road on this particular journey took him east, toward the sea. He collapsed at Shaoqiu, a palace relay station in what is now Hebei province. Sima Qian's account records that he had been unwell during the journey. He died at Shaoqiu. He was 49 years old. What happened in the hours and days after his death is documented in the Shiji as a conspiracy of concealment. Two men were present who understood that the emperor's death, if known, would immediately threaten their positions. One was Li Si, the prime minister, who had been the architect of legalist policy under the emperor, and who depended entirely on the emperor's favor for his authority. The other was Zhao Gao, Shisei, a powerful eunuch official with control over the imperial communications apparatus. Together they made a decision. The emperor's death would not be announced. The imperial carriage was sealed. The procession continued to move, as if the emperor were simply choosing not to be seen. It was summer. The body began to decompose. According to the Shiji, carts loaded with salted fish were placed near the imperial carriage to mask the smell. The procession traveled for weeks in this condition. Li Si and Zhao Gao used the time to forge an imperial edict. The emperor's chosen successor had been his eldest son, Fusu, who was stationed at the northern frontier with the general Meng Tian. The forged edict accused Fusu of disloyalty and ordered him to take his own life. It also ordered Meng Tian's execution. Fusu, believing the order to be genuine, complied. He self-unaliaved rather than resist what he believed to be his father's final command. The procession eventually returned to Xianyang, the Qin capital. The emperor's death was announced. His youngest son, Hu Hai, took the throne as the second emperor of Qin, with Zhao Gao effectively guiding him. The mausoleum that received the emperor's remains had been under construction for decades. It is one of the largest burial complexes ever built. The inner burial chamber, which has not been excavated as of the time this script was researched, is described in historical sources as containing rivers of mercury and scale models of the empire. The terracotta army, discovered in 1974 and now comprising an estimated 8,000 figures, was part of the outer burial complex. Those figures were created by conscripted labor. Workers who knew the layout of the inner chambers were reportedly sealed inside it to prevent the secrets of the tomb from being disclosed. Qin Shi Huang died at Shaqiu in 210 BCE. The cause, based on historical attribution in the Shiji and corroborated by modern analysis of conditions at his burial site, is attributed to the ingestion of mercury-containing longevity preparations over an extended period. The dynasty he built outlasted him by 4 years. Drunk into nothing, Emperor Hui of Han was the second emperor of the Han dynasty, and he died in 188 BCE at the age of 22, after spending the final years of his reign in a condition his own court recorded as deliberate withdrawal. He had not chosen the throne in any meaningful sense. He had been born into it. His father Liu Bian, the Emperor Gaozu, had founded the Han dynasty after the collapse of Qin and years of civil war. Liu Bian was a man who had fought his way to power from relatively humble origins, a figure whose court was shaped by the brutal pragmatism of someone who had survived faction, betrayal, and military conflict to become the ruler of a unified empire. He died in 195 BCE, and Hui, then a teenager, became emperor. The real power in the Han court at that moment was Hui's mother, Empress Liu. She had been central to Liu Bang's rise and had survived significant danger during those years, including periods of captivity. She was, by the time her son took the throne, an experienced political operator with no intention of becoming a passive dowager. She dominated the court. Officials understood that she was the effective authority. Hui was the emperor in name and in ceremony. Lady Qi had been Liu Bang's favorite concubine. She had a son, Ruyi, whom Liu Bang had reportedly considered making his heir before ultimately confirming Hui's position. That history made Lady Qi a threat to Empress Liu, or at least Empress Liu treated her as one. After Liu Bang's death, with Empress Liu in full control of the court, Lady Qi was confined, and her son Ruyi was summoned to the capital. Hui, reportedly aware of what was intended, attempted to protect Ruyi by keeping him close. For a period, he succeeded. Then one morning, Hui left Rui's side briefly to go on a dawn hunting trip, and Ruyi was poisoned while Hui was absent. What followed was documented by Sima Qian in the Shiji, and Empress Liu ordered Lady Qi subjected to a series of deliberate mutilations. Her limbs were rearranged. She was blinded and deafened by other means. She was rendered unable to speak. She was placed in a vessel in the palace latrines. Empress Liu then had Emperor Hui brought to see her, reportedly identifying what he was looking at, only when told. The Shiji records that Hui wept for an extended period after this. He then told those around him that a person capable of this act was not human, and that he could not govern a kingdom whose power rested on such acts. He was the emperor. He was also functionally helpless. He stopped attending to state business. He stopped holding court. He turned, according to the historical record, to drinking, and he drank heavily. This is the account preserved in the Shiji and in subsequent Han dynasty histories. He did not attempt to remove his mother from power. He did not challenge her publicly. He withdrew. Empress Liu continued to govern. She managed foreign policy, internal administration, and court appointments as if her son's opinion were not a relevant factor, because it was not. The court operated around him. Officials reported to her. The machinery of Han governance functioned without him. He fathered no confirmed legitimate successors during this period. The court around him continued to function and continued to defer to Empress Liu. He died in 188 BCE. He was 22 years old. The historical sources do not provide a specific acute cause of death beyond the documented pattern of physical decline that the Shiji records for his final years. Empress Liu governed the Han Empire directly for the 15 years following his death, appointing a succession of child emperors from among infant relatives while maintaining personal control, until her own death in 180 BCE. Deposed at 14, Liu Bian, the Emperor Shao of Han, became emperor at 13 years old following the death of his father Emperor Ling in 189 CE. He held the title for approximately 5 months. He was poisoned in 190 CE on the orders of Dong Zhuo, a warlord who had seized control of the Han capital. Liu Bian was 14 years old. The Han dynasty in the late 2nd century CE was not the unified, functioning empire of its early centuries. It had been hollowing out for decades. Emperor Ling, Liu Bian's father, had sold government offices, allowed eunuch factions to accumulate extraordinary internal power, and presided over a court consumed by factional violence. The Yellow Turban Rebellion earlier in the decade had required regional warlords to raise their own armies to suppress it, and those armies did not disappear when the rebellion ended. The men who commanded them remained armed, remained powerful, and understood that the central government was weak. When Emperor Ling died in the spring of 189 CE, two factions immediately competed for control of the young emperor. The eunuch faction controlled access to the inner palace. So the group of military officials led by the general He Jin sought to break the eunuch's power. He Jin summoned outside military forces to the capital, Luoyang, to strengthen his position. One of the commanders he summoned was Dong Zhuo, who controlled a substantial frontier army in the northwest. He Jin was killed by the eunuchs before the outside forces arrived. The eunuchs then attempted to flee with the emperor and his younger brother. They were overtaken. Most of the eunuchs were killed. The young emperor and his brother were found in the darkness near a river by soldiers searching for them. By the time Liu Bian was returned to the capital, Dong Zhuo had arrived with his army. Dong Zhuo moved quickly. His forces occupied Luoyang. He positioned himself at the center of court deliberations by force of military presence. He then decided that Liu Bian was unsuitable. The Hui of Han, the book of the later Han compiled by Fan Yi, records that Dong Zhuo considered Liu Bian insufficiently capable compared to his younger brother, Liu Shi. Dong Zhuo compelled the Empress Dowager to issue an edict formally deposing Liu Bian. Liu Bian was stripped of his imperial title and designated the Prince of Hongnong. He was confined. He was 14 years old, recently deposed, and entirely without allies capable of acting against a warlord who physically occupied the capital with an army. Dong Zhuo then had the Empress Dowager killed. He placed Liu Shi on the throne as Emperor Xian, the figure who would remain emperor in name for the remaining decades of the Han dynasty, while actual power passed through Dong Zhuo and then through a succession of other strongmen. Liu Bian remained confined for months. In 190 CE, he was ordered to drink poison. The Hui of Han records that his wife Lady Tang was present. Lady Tang reportedly asked to be allowed to die alongside him. That request was refused. Lady Tang was executed separately. Liu Bian was poisoned in 190 CE. He was 14 years old. The specific substance used is not named in the sources. Dong Zhuo continued to hold power over the Han court until 192 CE, when he was killed by his own adopted son Liu Bu at the instigation of the official Wang Yun. Humiliated, then killed. Emperor Min of Jin was the last emperor of the Western Jin dynasty to hold any real claim to the imperial seat at Chang'an. He surrendered that city in 316 CE after a siege that left the capital without food, and he spent the remaining years of his life in captivity, forced to perform acts of public humiliation for the entertainment of his captors, before being killed in 318 CE. The Western Jin dynasty had never fully recovered from the War of the Eight Princes, an extended civil conflict among members of the imperial family that had consumed the empire from 291 to 306 CREE. That war had depopulated entire regions, destabilized the northern frontier, and created the conditions that allowed non-Han groups, including the Xiongnu Confederation, to advance into the Chinese heartland with devastating effect. The event known as the Disaster of Yongjia, 311 CE, was the result. The Xiongnu-led Hanzhou state under Liu Chong sacked Luoyang, the eastern capital of the Jin dynasty. The Jin Shu, the Book of Jin compiled under Tang dynasty orders, records the scale of that defeat in terms that convey the scale of what was lost. Tens of thousands were killed. The emperor, at the time Emperor Hui, was captured and subsequently killed. Luoyang fell as a functioning imperial capital. Emperor Min came to the throne in an empire that had already lost its primary capital, its eastern territories, and much of its administrative coherence. He held Chang'an, the ancient western capital. He attempted to stabilize what remained. His court was reduced, his resources depleted, and the military forces he could call upon were insufficient for the situation he faced. When Hanzhou forces under the military commander Liu Yao besieged Chang'an, the siege was thorough. The Jin Shu records that the situation within the city deteriorated severely. The food supply collapsed. The garrison and the civilian population were reduced to extreme deprivation. Emperor Min held out as long as the city could hold. In 316 CE, he surrendered. He was taken to the Hanzhou court at Pingyang, where where Liu Kang held his court. Liu Yao's forces had captured him, but Liu Kang was the ruler who would dispose of him. What happened at the Hanzhou court is recorded in the Qin Shi. Emperor Min was stripped of imperial dignity and made to perform functions associated with servants. He was required to wear servant's clothing. He was required to pour wine at court banquets. She's serving the man who had defeated and imprisoned him. He was displayed in these circumstances in front of an audience that included former Jin officials who had been captured. The Qin Shi records that when Jin loyalists in the audience wept openly upon seeing their former emperor in this condition, they were executed for it. Emperor Min endured this for approximately 2 years. He was killed in 318 CE. The precise method of execution is not recorded uniformly across the sources, and the Qin Shi accounts at this point carry sufficient ambiguity that stating a single definitive method would not be accurate. The sources confirm the death and the year. Emperor Min died in 318 CE in captivity. The Western Jin dynasty effectively ended with his death, though a successor Jin state continued in the south for another century. Deposed and strangled. Emperor Shao of Liu Song, personal name Liu Yifu, reigned for less than 1 year before being deposed and killed by his own uncle in 424 CE. He was 17 years old. The historical record of his brief reign, preserved in the Song Shu, the history of the Liu Song dynasty, describes a pattern of arbitrary killing and unpredictable violence directed at palace staff and servants. The Liu Song dynasty had been founded only 3 years before Liu Yifu took the throne. His father Liu Yu, who reigned as Emperor Wu, had risen from a military background to displace the Eastern Jin dynasty and establish the first of the southern dynasties. Liu Yu died in 422 CE, leaving the dynasty to his son, who was, by every account in the Song Shu, completely unsuited for it. Liu Yifu became emperor at 15. The court around him was composed of senior officials who had served his father, men with significant experience in administration and military affairs. They were not prepared for what they encountered. The Song Shu records specific incidents from his reign. Servants and palace attendants were killed without documented cause. The killings were not the result of investigations, judicial processes, or even stated accusations. They were arbitrary. Officials who were present at court understood that proximity to the emperor was itself dangerous. The atmosphere the Song Shu describes as one of unpredictability, in which the normal patterns of court life could be interrupted at any moment by an act of violence, with no apparent logic. But senior officials, including Liu Yifu's own uncle, Liu Yilong, assessed the situation and determined that the emperor could not be permitted to continue. Liu Yilong organized a group of court officials who shared this assessment. The planning was conducted without the emperor's knowledge. The court, which had been founded on Liu Yu's military power and administrative capability, was not going to be destroyed by a teenager who was killing its servants for reasons the sources do not record as coherent. The coup was executed in 424 CE. Liu Yifu was removed from the throne. He was demoted to the title Prince of Yingyang, which was the formal mechanism of deposition within the Liu Song system. He was placed under confinement. He did not remain confined for long. The Song Shu records that he was killed shortly after the deposition. The method recorded in the Song Shu is strangulation. It should be noted that historians of the period have observed that successor dynasty writers had both the motive and the means to shape their accounts of deposed emperors in ways that would justify the coups that removed them. The Song Shu was compiled under a Liu Song court that had every reason to portray Liu Yifu as requiring removal. The general pattern of his behaviors described may be accurate, but readers of these accounts should understand the political context in which they were written. Liu Yifu died by strangulation in 424 CE. He was 17 years old. Liu Yilong took the throne as Emperor Wen and oversaw a period of relative stability in the Liu Song dynasty. Stabbed while sleeping. Emperor Qianfei of Liu Song, personal name Liu Zie, known in the historical record as the deposed emperor of Liu Song, was assassinated in 473 CE by palace attendants acting under the direction of his younger brother. He was 23 years old. His reign lasted less than 1 year. The Song Shu preserves a detailed account of that reign that constitutes some of the most extensively documented descriptions of imperial cruelty in Liu Song records. Liu Zie came to the throne in 472 CE, following the death of his father, Emperor Xiaowu. The Liu Song dynasty by this point was significantly less stable than it had been under Emperor Wen a generation earlier. The pattern of violent and short-lived reigns was becoming established. Liu Zie's father, Emperor Xiaowu, had himself been noted in the sources for erratic and violent behavior, and the court Liu Zie inherited reflected the consequences of years of instability. The Song Shu's account of Liu Zie's reign contains specific descriptions of acts that go beyond arbitrary killing into a pattern pattern of deliberate degradation. The sources record that he compelled female members of the imperial family, including his own aunts, to participate in arrangements that violated their status and dignity in systematic ways. Male and female individuals were subjected to public acts of degradation within the palace grounds. Officials who refused to comply with his orders or who were perceived to have looked at him in a way he found objectionable were killed. His mother, Empress Wang, attempted to intervene. The Song Shu records that she considered having him removed from power. He reportedly became aware of her intentions and responded with threats directed at her. A mother who had reached the point of planning to remove her own son from the throne had encountered a situation with no clear resolution available to her within the existing power structure. It was his younger brother, Liu Yu, who organized what the Song Shu presents as the only available response. Liu Yu was not acting alone. He had the support of palace officials who had determined that the continuation of Liu Zie's reign was incompatible with the survival of the court and, by extension, the dynasty. The planning was careful. The act had to occur in a way that gave Liu Zie no opportunity to respond. The assassination took place at night. Palace attendants, acting on Liu Yu's orders, entered the emperor's chambers while he was asleep. The Song Shu records that he was stabbed while sleeping. He died in 473 CE. He was 23 years old. The same historiographical caution that applies to the Song Shu account of Liu Yifu applies here. Later historians have noted that the extreme nature of the acts attributed to Liu Zie and the Song Shu may reflect the compiler's interest in making the coup that removed him appear not merely justified, but necessary. The account should be understood as a document written within a political context, not as a neutral record. Liu Yu took the throne as Emperor Min of Liu Song. Liu Zie was stabbed while sleeping in 473 CE. Strangled by his uncle, Emperor Hufei of Northern Qi, personal name Gao Yin, who held the throne of the Northern Qi dynasty for less than 1 year before being deposed and killed in 561 CE. He was 17 years old. His uncle organized the coup. The Bei Qi Shu, the Book of Northern Qi, preserves the account. The Northern Qi dynasty had been founded in 550 CE by Gao Yang, who took the throne as Emperor Wengshuan. Gao Yang had been one of the most capable military commanders of his generation, instrumental in the final dissolution of the Eastern Wei dynasty and the consolidation of Northern Qi power in the northeastern Chinese territories. He was also, by the account of the Bei Qi Shu, a man whose behavior became increasingly erratic and violent as his reign progressed. He drank heavily. He conducted executions on impulse. He was, in the terms of the sources, not a stable ruler in the latter portion of his reign. He died in 559 CE. The throne passed to Gao Yin, his son, who was 15 at the time of accession. Gao Yin had grown up in a court shaped by his father's later behavioral patterns. The Bei Qi Shu does not describe him as having demonstrated prior qualities that distinguished him positively, and his reign would not produce any. The Bei Qi Shu records that during his reign, Gao Yin subjected servants and palace attendants to physical ordeals for his own purposes. The pattern described is one in which the emperor treated the people within the palace as objects available for his use without consequence. Officials who were present at court operated in a climate they recognized as dangerous. The response within the court was not immediate, but it was building. So Gao Yin's uncle, Gao Yan, was a senior figure within the Northern Qi power structure. He held military authority and had the relationships with other court officials necessary to organize a collective response. He assembled the support needed and moved against his nephew. The deposition was executed in 561 CE. Gao Yin was removed from the throne and his title was stripped. He was then killed. The Bei Qi Shu records strangulation as the method of his death. The same historiographical note applies here as with the Liu Song accounts. The Bei Qi Shu was compiled under successor dynasty conditions in which the record of removed emperors served political purposes for the compilers. The general pattern of behavior described may reflect genuine historical events, but the account should be understood as one produced within a specific political context. Gao Yan took the throne as Emperor Xiaozhao of Northern Qi. Gao Yin died by strangulation in 561 CE. He was 17 years old. Fratricide at the gate. Li Shimin, who would reign as Emperor Zhong Zong of Tang and build what many historians of the period consider one of the most effectively governed empires in Chinese history, came to the throne through an act of deliberate killing. On the second day of the 7th month of 626 CE, he ambushed and killed his elder brother Li Jiancheng and his younger brother Li Yuanji at the Xuanwu gate of the Tang Palace complex in Chang'an. He was 27 years old. He died 23 years later in 649 CE at the age of 51. After consuming longevity preparations that the Ju Tang Shu, the Old Book of Tang, records as having damaged his health in his final months. The Tang dynasty had been founded by his father, Li Yuan, who became Emperor Gaozu in 618 CE, following the collapse of the Sui dynasty. Li Shimin had been central to his father's military campaigns. He was the second son, which meant that under normal succession practice, the throne would pass to Li Jiancheng, the eldest. Li Jiancheng had been designated crown prince. The court was divided between those aligned with the crown prince and those aligned with Li Shimin, who had accumulated military prestige and a network of loyal subordinates over years of campaigning. The tension between the two factions was extended and documented in both the Zhu Tang Shu and the Xin Tang Shu. The New Book of Tang. Plots and counterplots are recorded. Li Jiancheng and Li Yuanji reportedly had their own plans to move against Li Shimin. Li Shimin moved first. He arranged to have Li Yuan summoned on a pretext that required Li Jiancheng and Li Yuanji to pass through the Xuanwu Gate to reach him. His soldiers were waiting. Both brothers were killed at the gate. Li Shimin then entered the palace and presented his father with a situation that left no alternative. Li Xian, with his two other sons dead and the Tang capital controlled by his surviving son's forces, abdicated within weeks. Li Shimin became Emperor Taizong. His reign is documented as administratively capable. He assembled advisors who were permitted within limits to criticize imperial decisions. The empire expanded. Trade on what would later be called the Silk Road increased. The population grew. These are the accomplishments recorded in the Tang histories. He also conducted purges of potential threats among the broader Li family. Members of the imperial bloodline who might constitute future challenges to the throne were removed from positions of power or eliminated. The consolidation of his position after Xuanwu Gate was thorough. In his later years, Li Shimin became focused on longevity. This was not unusual for Tang dynasty emperors, several of whom would follow the same pattern. Taoist alchemical practice in the Tang period included the preparation of compounds intended to extend life or achieve immortality. These preparations were consistent with formulations of the era that incorporated cinnabar, mercury compounds, and other mineral substances. Some preparations were brought from outside China entirely. The Zhu Tang Shu records that Li Shimin employed foreign alchemists, including practitioners from India, who prepared compounds for him. The Zhu Tang Shu records a deterioration in his health following his consumption of these preparations. He had been in relatively robust health for most of his reign. The decline described in the sources was notable enough for the court to document it. He became unable to conduct normal court functions. The deterioration continued over the period the sources describe. He died in 649 CE. He was 51 years old. The Zhu Tang Shu attributes his decline and death to the preparations he had consumed. Some historians have noted that preparations consistent with those described would have introduced toxic levels of heavy metals into the body over time, though the specific compounds are not named with clinical precision in the source texts. Li Shimin died in 649 CE. He had ruled for 23 years. The cause recorded in the Tang histories is attributed to the longevity elixirs. Poisoned with pastry, Emperor Zhong Zong of Tang, personal name Li Xian, died on the third day of the 7th month of 710 CE. He was 54 years old. The Zhu Tang Shu and the Ziji Tongjin, the comprehensive mirror in aid of governance, compiled by Sima Guang in the 11th century, both record that he was poisoned by his wife, Empress Wei. The circumstances and the immediate aftermath are among the more precisely dated events of the Tang Middle Period. Li Xian had been emperor twice. The first time was brief and ended in humiliation. His mother Wu Zetian had dominated the Tang court since the death of Emperor Gaozong in 683 CE. She had governed as regent, then with escalating direct authority, and in 690 CE, she formally declared herself emperor of a new dynasty, the Zhou, becoming the only woman in Chinese history to reign as emperor in her own name. She removed Li Xian from the throne in 684 CE, approximately 2 months into his first reign, and had him exiled. He spent years in exile, during which he was under surveillance and under the constant awareness that his continued existence depended on his mother's continued permission. He was restored to the throne in 705 CE, following a coup by Tang loyalists, who forced Wu Zetian, by then elderly and unwell, to abdicate. She died later that year. Li Xian, who had spent 2 decades in the position of a man whose life was contingent on someone else's choices, now held the Tang throne for the second time. His second reign was not an exercise of real power in the way the title suggested. Empress Wei had spent the years of Li Qian's exile cultivating her own ambitions and her own faction. The model that Wu Zetian had established, of a woman exercising imperial authority, was visible and had a recent precedent. Empress Wei and her daughter Princess Anli operated within the court with increasing autonomy. Officials who sought influence understood that access to Empress Wei was more reliable than access to the emperor. Li Jian does not appear in the sources as a figure who actively resisted this arrangement. He had survived by not resisting arrangements for most of his adult life. The court that surrounded him during his second reign was dominated by factions he did not control. On the 3rd of the 7th month of 710 CE, Li Xian ate a pastry. The Jutong Shu and the Ziji Tongjin record that the pastry had been poisoned. He died that day. He was 54 years old. Whether Princess Anlei was an active co-conspirator in the poisoning, or whether her implication in the sources reflects the political context of the account's composition, is a matter historians have debated. Her role is recorded in the sources, but the degree of her direct involvement is not established with the same clarity as Empress Wei's. This should be understood as an area of historical uncertainty. Within weeks of Li Xian's death, a coup organized by his son Li Longji, who would reign as Emperor Xuanzong, and the Princess Taiping moved against Empress Wei's faction. Empress Wei was killed. Princess Anlei was also killed during the coup. Li Xian died on the 3rd of the 7th month of 710 CE. The cause recorded in the Jutong Shu is poisoning. Empress Wei was killed shortly after, left to rot. Zhu Yijun, the Wanli Emperor of the Ming dynasty, reigned for 48 years, longer than any other Ming emperor. He died on the 18th day of the 8th month of 1620 CE. He was 57 years old. The Ming Shi, the history of the Ming dynasty, documents the period of his reign in detail. What it records is not a story of active violence, but of comprehensive, sustained abdication of the functions of governance, carried out over approximately 28 years, combined with the systematic removal of those who objected to it. He had not always governed this way. He came to the throne in 1572 CE at the age of 9, and for the first decade of his reign, the government was effectively managed by the Grand Secretary Zhang Zhuzheng, one of the most capable administrators in Ming history. Zhang Zhuzheng reformed the fiscal system, improved tax collection, strengthened the northern border defenses, and brought a degree of administrative coherence to a dynasty that had been experiencing significant difficulties. The young emperor received Zhang Zhuzheng's guidance and the empire functioned. Zhang Zhuzheng died in 1582 CE. He was 57 years old. Within months of his death, Zhu Yijun had Zhang Zhuzheng's family investigated, stripped of assets, and effectively destroyed. The reforms Zhang Zhuzheng had implemented began to erode. What followed over the next several years was the beginning of the Wanli Emperor's withdrawal. The precise reasons for it have been discussed and debated by historians of the Ming period for centuries. But one significant factor recorded in the sources is the succession controversy. The emperor's favored concubine, Lady Zheng, had a son, Zhu Changshun, whom the emperor wished to designate as crown prince. Tradition and strong court opinion held that the position should go to his eldest son by another mother, Zhu Changluo. The dispute dragged on for years. Officials submitted memorial after memorial insisting on traditional succession. The emperor refused to comply and refused to accept their arguments, but also refused to formally designate Zhu Changshun in defiance of the officials. The court was paralyzed on the question for over a decade. The emperor's response to this and to broader court friction was to stop appearing. He stopped holding court audiences. He stopped reading and responding to the official memorials that were the primary mechanism through which the empire was governed. Officials submitted documents that went unanswered for months, then years. Appointments went unfilled for extended periods because the emperor would not approve them. The censorate, the judiciary, and the various boards of the government continued to function at lower levels, but decisions that required imperial approval simply did not get made. Officials who pushed back on this, who submitted memorials criticizing the emperor's absence, who requested audiences, or who framed their objections in terms that the emperor found offensive, were demoted, dismissed, or imprisoned. The emperor was not incapacitated during this period. He was present in the palace. He simply declined to govern. The Ming Shi records this pattern in substantial detail across the decades in which it continued. He did have periods of engagement. Military crises on the northern and northeastern borders produced responses, including the campaigns in Korea against Japanese forces in the 1590s. But the day-to-day administration of the empire was left to subordinates operating without consistent imperial direction, and the structural deterioration that accumulated over decades could not be fully compensated for by subordinate officials, acting without the authority to make binding decisions. In his later years, the physical consequences of a reign spent in the inner palace became apparent. Court documents record that he had difficulty walking. His mobility was significantly impaired. The Dingling tomb complex, his burial site, was excavated between 1956 and 1958. The skeletal remains recovered confirmed severe spinal scoliosis and physical degeneration consistent with extended immobility over many years. This is confirmed archaeological evidence, not historical inference. Some historians have attributed contributing factors to his decline, including possible use of substances, though this is not uniformly confirmed in primary sources with the same clarity as his documented governance failures and physical condition. It should be noted as a contested attribution, rather than an established fact. He died on the 18th day of the 8th month of 1620 CE. He was 57 years old. The Ming dynasty outlasted him by 24 years. It fell in 1644 CE to the forces of the Manchu Qing dynasty pressing from the northeast and to internal rebellions that had been gathering force for years in conditions that had been developing across the decades of the Wanli Emperor's withdrawal. The skeletal evidence from Dingling confirms the physical state of the man who spent 48 years on the throne and 28 of them not governing. He died on the 18th of the 8th month of 1620 CE. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.